Hello and welcome to News Central TV. My name is Mazino Apil, and here are stories making headlines beyond the continent. Let's begin with U.S. politics, where both Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump are trying to grab headlines in the run-up to the U.S. elections on November 5. Both were out on the campaign trail on Monday, with Harris sitting down for another major interview and Trump commemorating the October 7 attacks. For News Central, Chief International Correspondent Afua Hagan has more.
Those are all issues that
Vice President Kamala Harris faced tough questions about how she'd pay for her economic plans, whether Democrats were too slow to enact border security measures, how she'd confront Russia over its war in Ukraine, and more in a wide-ranging interview.
Donald Trump, if he were president.
The Democratic presidential nominee's sit-down with CBS comes amid a media blitz that is also putting Harris in front of friendlier interviewers with more targeted audiences. She told 60 Minutes that if elected president, she would not meet Vladimir Putin for peace talks if Ukraine was not also represented.
Ukraine must have a say in the future of Ukraine. Donald Trump, if he were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now. He talks about, oh, he can end it on day one. You know what that is? It's about surrender.
Republican U.S. presidential nominee Donald Trump was also invited to 60 Minutes. He accepted, but later changed his mind and declined, according to CBS. Trump's campaign disputed that he ever agreed to be interviewed. His spokesman, Stephen Chung, called it fake news. Meanwhile, Trump has warned that Americans should never forget the October 7th attacks on Israel by Hamas militants as he paid tribute to the victims at a campaign event. Trump was speaking to a crowd of a few hundred at an event at his Trump National Doral Golf Club in southern Florida to commemorate the first anniversary of the attacks. He went on to claim that the October 7th attack would never have happened if he was president. In the race to see if America gets its first woman president or a second Donald Trump term, it's all about the candidates trying to grab headlines on the campaign trail. For News Central, I'm Afua Hagan.
Away from that, U.S. President Joe Biden has said Hurricane Milton, the Category 4 storm headed towards the southeastern United States, could be the worst hit to hit Florida in a century. Biden said he had postponed a planned trip to Angola and Germany this week because he does not think he could be out of the country at this time. Biden also condemned misinformation that Republican president candidate Donald Trump and his party have spread about hurricane relief efforts ahead of next month's U.S. election.
The current path of the storm is expected to Tampa Bay area and cut directly across the state, east to west, all the way across the state, with the potential for this storm to both enter Florida as a hurricane and leave Florida as a hurricane on the Atlantic coast. This could be the worst storm to hit Florida in over a century. And God willing, it won't be, but that's what it's looking like right now.
Florida Mayor Ron DeSantis has urged residents to evacuate as the weather-weary state is bracing for a hit from Hurricane Milton, amongst the storm-packing furious winds and the threat of walls of water gushing inland. As the second huge hurricane in as many weeks rumbled towards the state's battered west coast, a sense of looming catastrophe spread as people raced to board up their homes and evacuate to shelters or anywhere they could. As of Tuesday morning, Milton was generating maximum sustained winds of 145 miles per hour and a threat of as much as 15 feet of storm surge. This was disclosed by the National Hurricane Center, calling it an extremely dangerous storm and urging people to heed evacuation orders. Now, live for more on this, I am being joined by Chief International Correspondent Afua Hagan. Afua, thank you very much for joining us again this evening. Can you tell us how the White House is responding to the upcoming, or rather incoming, threat of Hurricane Milton?
Well, as you saw there, President Joe Biden has postponed that trip abroad. He was supposed to be having quite an important meeting with leaders of the UK, France, and Germany in Berlin, and it would have been his first visit to Berlin as president. But Joe Biden is very aware of how bad the optics would be if he wasn't in the country during this incredible storm that is heading towards Florida. Now, it's not unusual for presidents to cancel trips because of this type of reason. We saw Donald Trump do a similar thing in 2019. And as a spokesperson from the White House said earlier on, actually, the real work begins after the storm has passed. It's all about the cleanup and all about making sure that the right resources are in place to help people recover after these devastating losses in the days and weeks to come. So yes, the White House remaining very, very concerned about the storm. And Joe Biden, when he gave that briefing earlier on, urging people to evacuate, saying that this would be the most dangerous storm to reach Florida in 100 years.
So when Hurricane Milton makes landfall, where and when would it be expected to hit?
Well, it's expected to hit Wednesday night into Thursday morning, and it's expected to hit that Tampa, Florida area. But it also will hit areas that have been affected by Hurricane Helene under 2 weeks ago. So North Carolina and parts of Georgia and parts of Florida that were hit already. Now, the death toll from Hurricane Helene today was reaching over 300 people, $47.5 billion worth of damage is expected. Now, this storm has downgraded but is expected to intensify again as it makes landfall. 6 to 8 inches of rain, that's about several months worth of rain, are expected to fall in one day. The storm surge could be up to 15 feet. That's sort of 2.5 times my height, as it were. And that particular storm surge is described as unsurvivable. You had the mayor of Tampa earlier on saying that people have to leave. If you don't leave, you will die. And other officials advising people if they don't want to leave, then they should write their name and their date of birth in permanent marker for the authorities to be able to figure out who they are when they discover their body. So some very, very serious and stark warnings for people living in these areas in Florida.
Well, Afua, earlier this evening, you gave a very scientific, very academic description of the role climate change has to play in these storms. So if you could do that again, exactly what role does climate change have to play here with the ferocity and frequency of the storms they're expecting?
Absolutely. There's no doubt that climate change is playing a huge part in the ferocity and the frequency of these storms, and it's about these rapidly intensifying storms. So what happens is when the sea is warmer, as it is now, because of climate change, that gives more energy and more volume to the storms, and the storms intensify quickly. So it has this extreme rapid intensification. So you have the storm increasing 90 miles per hour every 25 hours, roughly. So a storm that will start off category 1 will become category 5 very, very quickly. And so it's the rapid intensification because of the heat from the sea. And when you have these rapidly intensifying storms, they have more water in them. They tend to be bigger, which means you have higher amounts of rainfall as well. So in the past sort of 40 years, for instance, you have 29% more extreme intensifying storms than you had in the 1970s. And there has been actually many of these since 2017. You had Hurricane Laura in 2020, Hurricane Ida in 2021. Hurricane Helene, only under 2 weeks ago, was another rapidly intensifying storm. So the sea is warmer because of climate change. That means the storms get bigger and more dangerous more quickly and are bigger, have more water in them and more force in them than we've ever seen before.
Well, thank you very much, Afua, once again for bringing us the details of the storm. Thank you. Now let's talk about the conflicts going on in the Middle East, where the United Nations humanitarian officials are calling for urgent action to stop the ongoing conflict in Lebanon from spiraling into a similar devastation as seen in Gaza. Matthew Hollingworth, Lebanon country director for the United Nations World Food Programme, says the country could go into the same spiral of doom, adding that major efforts must be made to stop the situation from escalating.
Gaza from January through the end of June this year, before I moved to Lebanon. It is in my mind, from the time I wake until the time I sleep, that we could go into the same sort of spiral of doom, and we need to do everything we can to stop that from happening in this particular crisis. We have gone through a great deal of preparedness and anticipation of an unfortunate escalation, which is now being tested, and I think we are able to respond, and we have responded to that test. But clearly, the scale and speed in which people have been displaced because of this current escalation is enormous.
We are seeing the same patterns that we saw in Gaza, the same means and methods of warfare that have been used. And as a result, we're seeing civilians pay the ultimate price, whether it be the hospitals being closed, 1 million people displaced, civilians killed, schools impacted. The devastation is beyond belief for all people in Lebanon as it is in Gaza. We can't let this happen again.
Meanwhile, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has warned Israel against attacking any of Iran's infrastructure amid concerns of a potential Israeli strike on oil or nuclear sites following Iran's missile barrage last week. Speaking during a televised address, Araghchi said any attack on Iranian infrastructure would provoke an even stronger response. His statement came after Israel announced it was preparing a response to Iran's missile attack on 1st October, marking the second such assault in 6 months. On Monday, an official statement quoted Araghchi as saying Iran did not seek war in the region.
به رژیم صهیونیستی توصیه می‌کنیم که اراده جمهوری اسلامی ایران رو آزمایش نکنه. اگر هر حمله‌ای به کشور ما صورت بگیره، پاسخ ما قدرتمندانه‌تر و پرقدرت‌تر از گذشته خواهد بود. هر گونه حمله به تأسیسات زیربنایی جمهوری اسلامی ایران با پاسخی محکمتر قطعاً مواجه خواهد شد و دشمنان ما می‌دانند که چه اهدافی در داخل رژیم صهیونیستی در دسترس ما قرار داره.
And now, live for more on this, I'm being joined by international correspondent Adeshawa Josh. Adeshawa, good evening. Good of you to join us here this evening. Adeshawa, let's already start by asking, we're hearing reports of an Israeli expanded ground operation in southern Lebanon. What more can you tell us about this?
Indeed, Manzino, today we heard the Israeli military announce that it has deployed a fourth army division into, and it signals an extreme ground offensive against Hezbollah in Lebanon. You'd recall that last week, Israel announced that it was beginning a limited scope operation on the ground in southern Lebanon, and the objective of that invasion was to bring back Israelis fleeing northern Lebanon because of Hezbollah's attack in the aftermath of Hamas's attack on October the 7th. For today, Israel's announcement that Kiev is now gone into a new zone through the west. And what this means is we do not know how long this operation is going to last. We do not know how many soldiers are on. I usually soldiers. If Israel sending more army division, I think we're talking thousands if you do the math. And aside the expanding scope, we saw overnight route that last ended. This overnight raid in southern Beirut, which headquarters of Hezbollah, killed a Hezbollah leader who was in charge of budgeting in the. It is latest Hezbollah leader.
Well, Adisha, I will have to apologize. It was a bit rough listening to you there, but we'll come back to you in a later time for more information about the situation. Thank you very much. Now, we're going to go on a break, and when we come back, Russo-Ukrainian conflict, Harris stands firm on Ukraine's representation in peace talks. More when we return. You're welcome back. Now, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris has made it clear that if elected president, she would not engage in peace talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin without Ukraine's representation. In an interview, Harris emphasized that Ukraine must have a voice in determining its own future. This stance aligns with President Joe Biden's administration's previous rejection of direct talks with Putin. Harris also criticized her Republican rival, Donald Trump, for his policies in Ukraine, describing them as a surrender to the invasion. Trump has been vocal in his criticism of Washington's aid to Ukraine, claiming he could swiftly broker a peace deal with Putin. However, Harris warns that such a deal would likely involve ceding territory in eastern Ukraine to Russia.
Bilaterally without Ukraine, no. Ukraine must have a say in the future of Ukraine. Donald Trump, if he were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now. He talks about, oh, he can end it on day one. You know what that is? It's about surrender. Those are all issues that we will deal with if and when it arrives at that point.
Now, thousands gathered in central Thailand on Tuesday to perform the final rites for 20 school children and their 3 teachers who were killed in a bus inferno last week. The students had been returning from a school trip when their coach bus burst a tire, crashing into a highway barrier just north of the capital Bangkok and erupted into flames. Thai police have confirmed the arrest and detention of the bus driver, who faces 4 charges including reckless driving, causing death, and fleeing the scene of the crash. The tragedy has sparked a public outcry over vehicle safety, with many questioning the use of compressed gas tanks on buses.
จะรอดน้องต้องไปโรงพยาบาลคิดอย่างเดียวเลยคือน้องต้องไปอยู่ที่โรงพยาบาลน้องอาจจะรอดเดินทางกลับมาคือหวังแค่ลูกรอดตอนนั้นเขารู้สึกพี่เป็นไงบ้างช่วยเล่าตอนนั้นก็คือคิดอย่างเดียวเลยคือว่าลูกต้องรอดกลับมาคือลูกต้องรอดมีความคิดอยู่แค่อย่างเดียวเลยไม่คิดว่าลูกจะจากไปไวขนาดนี้โทษจะมาทดแทนชีวิตน้องไม่มีครับสำหรับเราแต่ตอนที่ว่ารู้ว่าน้องเกิดเรื่องเราก็ภาวนาแค่ว่าอย่าให้น้องอยู่บนนั้นแล้วคราวนี้ลูกชายไปด้วยรับได้ไหมมันก็ยังบ้านมันก็ยังเงียบๆอยู่ประมาณนี้มันมองไปทางไหนก็ยังเห็นเป็นน้องประมาณนี้ขับรถคันที่2อ่ะถ้าเขาเอารถมาตรวจเช็คแบบว่าตรวจเช็คก่อนออกเดินทางมันก็จะโอเคนะคะแต่คราวนี้เหมือนนะคะว่ารถคันนี้ติดแก๊สทั้งหมด11คันก็คือมันทั่วของตัวรถเลยถ้าสมมติว่าติดแค่ปกติมากสุดก็เห็นแค่8ถังต่อคันอย่างกับรถบรรทุกรถพ่วงอะไรพวกนี้ค่ะแล้วถามว่าประตูฉุกเฉินอะไรพวกนี้ก็เข้าใจว่าคนขับเนี่ยก็เหมือนเขาก็ทำหน้าที่เต็มที่แล้วแต่เพียงแต่ว่าอยากให้คนขับมีสติให้มากกว่านั้นหน่อย
Malaysian Foreign Minister Mohammed Hassan has described the 5-point consensus as the pillar of negotiations on Myanmar, urging that peace talks must involve all parties in the country. Myanmar has been in turmoil since February 2021, when its military ousted the elected civilian government, sparking protests that have escalated into an armed rebellion against the ruling junta. ASEAN, of which Myanmar is a member, that's the ASEAN, has led several diplomatic efforts to resolve the crisis, but progress has been limited. The ASEAN leaders are set to meet in Laos from Wednesday, with the conflict in Myanmar expected to feature prominently on the 10-member bloc agenda.
We have this, what we call it, 5-point consensus. And Myanmar issue have to be from a ASEAN centrality approach rather than individual country to do it. We have a common understanding. We have this agreed already on a 5-point consensus. Then let's work on that. Very simple. The takeaway is that we have to really approach everybody in Myanmar. Okay? And Myanmar also has to listen to ASEAN. They have to abide to the ASEAN Charter because it's part of ASEAN. And they are also the part of signatory of the 5-point consensus. So let's put all of it together. We want to see this so-called crisis, atrocities in Myanmar also.
Doctors and citizens are marching to condemn and commemorate 3 months since the rape and murder of a trainee medic at a government-run hospital in Kolkata, India. The suspect, Sanjay Roy, was arrested the day after the young doctor's bloodied body was discovered in a room at RG Kar Hospital, where she had gone to rest after a 36-hour shift. Roy was a volunteer at the hospital, assisting patients. On Monday, the Central Bureau of Investigation confirmed he had been formally charged with rape and murder and could face the death penalty. The brutality of the doctor's rape and murder has sent ripples of horror across the country, with the Supreme Court saying the case has shocked the conscience of the nation. And that's all on Beyond the Nation, Beyond the Continent. You can watch News Central live on DSTV, channel 422, Star Times, channel 274, Avo TV, and of course on YouTube. Now, many thanks for watching. My name is Mazino Appeal.